Well, this morning we are entering into a new series, and it's going to be a 6-part series. And it is part of this year of fellowship that we've been looking at. Of course, the whole year we're examining what it means to be a healthy congregation and our fellowship together. And it comes from an idea that someone shared one time, that everybody needs a Paul in their life, everyone needs a Barnabas in their life, and everyone needs a Timothy. In other words, we all need someone like a Paul who's able to pour in and mentor us in positive ways. We need someone like a Barnabas who came alongside so many others and was a friend to them and walked the journey of life with them. And that everyone needs a Timothy, someone that they're mentoring and pouring their life into. Some have called it, we need a teacher, we need a friend, and we need a student. I've called the series Learning, Leaning, and Leading. We need someone from whom we learn from, we need someone we can lean upon, and we need someone that we can pour into. So we're going to spend 2 weeks on looking at different relationships in the pages of Scripture. 2 in the category that we'd call leading, 2 in the category we'd call leaning, and 2 in the category we'd call leading. And so this morning we're going to look at Moses and Jethro, and how Jethro comes in at just the right time and teaches and pours into Moses' life, and how that narrative is constructed in Exodus chapter 18 to help exemplify that. And then next week we're going to look at Elijah and Elisha, and that relationship between Elijah, the leader, and Elisha, the person who comes and learns from him. In the second part of the series, the second 2 weeks, we're going to look at David and Jonathan's relationship, as well as a few friends that get a bad reputation sometimes, but who really come in to do a great job at the beginning, and that's Job and Job's 3 friends, and all the things that Job goes through and how they help him through that. On the third 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at relationships of leading another person, and we're going to look at Eli and Samuel, and then finally Paul and Onesimus from the book of Philemon. So this morning we're looking at the relationship between Moses and Jethro, and we're going to find that in Exodus chapter 18. So if you would turn with me to Exodus 18, we'll share this passage, the first 27 verses in this narrative. In Exodus chapter 18, verse 1, it says, "Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And after Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I have become an alien in a foreign land. And the other son was named Eleazar, for he said, my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' son and wife, came to him in the desert, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all about the hardships they had met along the way and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear all about the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods. He did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, what is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening? And Moses answered him, because the people come to seek me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws. Moses' father-in-law replied, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to Him. Teach them the decrees and laws. Show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times. But have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple case they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. He served as judge for all the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country. So we want to discuss this narrative, this account, and I want you to notice how it is very different from other narratives up to this point, and I think it's different for the purpose of highlighting the relationship between Moses and Jethro. So just remember that here we are with Moses facing a crisis in the second part of the passage. He's hearing cases of disputes that are going on amongst the people of Israel as they seek to live as God's people, having been rescued from Egypt. And these cases are coming big and small, and they're all being dropped on Moses' lap, and Moses is willing to hear them. And it says that he does this from the morning until the evening. So a long time he's sitting here in this dispute. And so Jethro takes him aside and gives him some management advice on these things. Now, the interesting part about this particular narrative in chapter 18 is that it is very different from the previous 17 chapters. So if you know anything about the book of Exodus, you know that the book of Exodus is about God's rescue of His people from Egypt. By the end of the book of Genesis, a man named Joseph and his father, Jacob, and all of Jacob's other sons and all of their children, they've all moved down and they're settled in the land of Egypt. And they're living there peacefully because Joseph has this position of authority and he's kind of made a way for them. But between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, hundreds of years have passed. And in that time, the people that were there in Israel, they've grown and they've prospered. And at one point, the Egyptians, who historically have been fairly xenophobic, not being real trustful of other people who are not them, they looked on these Israelites as a threat. And they decided the way to deal with the threat was to enslave them. So by the time you hit the first part of the book of Exodus, these people of Israel have no power of their own. They are living in a foreign land under a foreign ruler who has oppressed them. And they groan. We're told that in the second chapter, that they groan in their slavery. And God hears their groaning. And He sets in motion a plan to rescue them. So Exodus then begins laying out this plot, and it's so wonderful that Hollywood has made movies based on this kind of plot where God reaches into their circumstances, sends a man named Moses, and Moses stands up as the leader of the people, confronts Pharaoh, and through God's power and the 10 plagues, finally convinces Pharaoh to let the people go. And Pharaoh lets them go. Of course, just like any Hollywood score, it's got a climax scene where the people have left, but Pharaoh changes his mind. He hunts them down at the shores of the Red Sea and there threatens to destroy them until God again rescues them by allowing them to pass through a body of water unharmed while Pharaoh's armies are held at bay, and then finally destroys Pharaoh's army in that same body of water. Chapter 15, you get a song celebrating the rescue of the people. Well, that's the first 15 chapters. Now, if you know Exodus well, you notice that all of a sudden the narrative changes. In Exodus chapter, by the time you finish Exodus 15, you're thinking God is the creator of the universe. He's able to do anything. He's able to overcome the power of the Egyptians, and here's this people that are going to go forth and serve Him faithfully. Well, Exodus wants to tell you that's not the way it works. There's not a happily ever after. Chapter 16, the people are in the wilderness, having been rescued by God's hand, and they suddenly realize in their circumstances, how are we going to feed ourselves? Well, this Moses and this God of his brought us into the wilderness to die. How are we going to survive in the wilderness? And so we have this now juxtaposition. We have God's power and God's ability, God's faithfulness, and a people who doubt him at every corner. Of course, in chapter 16, God feeds them through a special food called manna and quail that come to give them meat. 17, you think, okay, now the Israelites will get it. But they don't. Chapter 17, they're thirsty. And so they begin to complain against Moses and against God. Why did you bring us out in the wilderness to kill us with thirst? But of course, God, through Moses, overcomes that situation. So now we have this picture of a faithful, powerful God on one hand and a pretty stiff-necked, unfaithful people on the other. And then all of a sudden we get chapter 18. Why is 18 there? I mean, it's really a story about Jethro, the father-in-law, and Moses' wife and his two sons coming to meet up. I can't imagine, and before Scripture was written down, when they used to share these stories orally, the rescue, did someone sit down at the campfire and say, what happened to Moses' wife and kids? Where are they in the story? And so someone suddenly, under the inspiration of God, decided, well, we got to explain why they came back and where they went in the first place? I don't think so. I don't think anyone would have known that they left in the narrative, and they never really come into it again. What's the purpose of having this family reunion in the middle of the wilderness? Jethro is in this passage, and then he never appears again. So he's not a major character. Why is it there? And why is there this conversation? This is one of the longest conversations between two people, not including a conversation with God, in the whole book of Exodus. And I think it's there to highlight, here's this Jethro, who Moses had married his daughter, and he had lived with him for a number of years beforehand. When Moses got the call from God to be sent to Egypt, he seems to have recognized the danger he would be in and had sent his wife and his two sons back so they'd be safe with his father. So here comes the family to be reunited. But I think the purpose of the reuniting is not so much just to tell a tender family story as it is to set up the second part of chapter 18, where you see that Moses, the great leader of Israel, the man who now stands as almost folkloric, heroic feats that God performed through him, he still has someone in his life who's able to speak into his circumstances and give him advice at just the right time. So notice what's happening here. Again, they're having this very difficult time managing all the complaints that are coming in, and Moses has to account for all this. He's trying to be a manager, and here comes Jethro to give him a little bit of management advice. Now, this management advice is, while obviously it's a very old concept because it's in the book of Exodus, it's still around. The same type of management advice. My eldest brother, Wayne, he's a civil engineer, retired now, but when I got into pastoral ministry, he knew that there's a fair amount of pastoral ministry that's about management. You have to do certain things as an administrator when you're in that role. And so he handed me this little book, because he used to like to read management books. He handed me a book called The 1 Minute Manager. It's just a little tiny thing, a little story, and it's really written as a story. And so the story begins, a young man wants to become a good manager. How is he going to become and learn how to be a good manager? Well, find other people who are successful managers and model yourself after them. So he begins to get on the phone, and he calls these different places. He gets advice on who's been a successful manager, and he calls them up and sees if he can get an appointment with them. But he can't, because they're successful managers, and they're always busy. And those that he goes and sees don't have very much time for him. He doesn't really get a sense of what makes them a great manager. Until somebody suggests, why don't you call the 1 Minute Manager? So he does, calls the 1 Minute Manager, and to his surprise, he gets the secretary, and the secretary says, sure, I'll patch you right through. And he gets through to him. He begins to ask, "Sir, I'd like to become a great manager, and I've heard that you're a good manager. I wonder if I can make an appointment with you." And the 1-minute manager says, "Sure, stop by any time except Tuesday afternoon. I'd be glad to see you any time except Tuesday afternoon. Just stop on by, I'll be here." So now he begins to doubt what kind of manager he is, because all the other really great managers are busy all the time, because that's what a great manager should be. And here's this guy that says, "Well, just stop by." Well, how can he be a great manager? He's not busy. He's not too busy to be able to see me. And so he goes, and of course, he gets the principles of being a 1-minute manager, and it's really not that difficult. The 1-minute manager knows how to delegate, and he knows how to communicate. I've just ruined the book for you, sorry, spoiler alert. But he knows how to delegate, and he knows how to communicate. And that's exactly what Jethro begins to do for Moses. He teaches him how to communicate and teaches him how to delegate. Moses, you teach the people what God expects. Moses, you teach them God's laws and God's statutes. That's your role. Teach them. And then begin to appoint people that can solve the smaller disputes. Moses, do that. And the people will be able to handle most of the things on their own with you kind of teaching them and delegating to them, and then they can bring the really difficult decisions to you. And maybe like that 1-minute manager, Moses will have time. Now, why is Jethro able to do this? Again, why this very strange narrative in chapter 18 about the family reunion, about this conversation between Jethro and Moses, which is about the only place that happens in Exodus? Because I think the narrative, God speaking through this word, is trying to remind us that there was this relationship between Moses and Jethro. That Jethro had journeyed alongside Moses. And because he had journeyed alongside Moses for some time, because he had cared for his family, Jethro had the authority to be able to speak into Moses' life at just the right time. He had the authority to be able to speak into his life at just the right time. One of my former students, Chris Johnson, is now a leader in the Young Life organization. He has a little Young Life group in rural retreat. Started it this past year. God has been blessing that. They didn't have a Young Life group there before, and he's made some wonderful inroads. He has some people going to camp. He's done well. And I learned a lot because I asked a lot of questions about the Young Life organization while he was there and while he was taking classes from me and my student. And one of the foundational concepts in Young Life is to earn the right to speak into the life of a young man or a young woman. That their foundation concept is I need to build a relationship that's not just me preaching at them or teaching at them, but I build a relationship with them that allows me to earn the right to speak into that young man or young woman's life. Earn the right. And I think why this narrative is here and why it's so influential, or why it's structured the way it is because it wants to demonstrate that Jethro, in their conversation they had and all the preceding time that they had built this relationship, Jethro had built the right and earned the right. That when Moses, who's now the leader of this great people, Jethro's able to come alongside him and say, you know what? There's a way that you could do this better. If you agree and if God agrees, then here's another suggestion, another way that you could do this that might be better. And it turns out that Jethro had earned the right, that God agreed with that decision, and they were able to make improvements in the life of Israel together. That leads me to this question. Who have you allowed authority to speak into your life? I was walking yesterday and I was thinking, reflecting through that question. Who have I, because I still need someone to teach me. I need a teacher. But who do I allow the authority to be able to speak into my life with some authority? And I need to have perhaps one or two people. I mean, I listen to advice from a lot of people, but who can really speak into my life with a sort of authority? And to identify them and then to continue to cultivate a relationship with them. Who do you have in your life that you allow to speak with some authority? Someone who's trusted, someone who has your best interests at heart, someone who loves God and is able to mentor you, who do you have that's able to speak into your life? And it doesn't matter whether you find yourself in your 75th year or you find yourself in your 15th year. I think we all need someone who we trust who's able to speak into our life. Who would that be for you? So it's Father's Day. So often on Father's Day we have a little gift that we give out, and so we do. We have a little gift that we're going to give out. I have some gentlemen over here for all the men in the congregation. You don't necessarily have to be a father at this point in your life, but we have a gift. If you're a man who's here, we have a gift. And it's just a little McDonald's gift card. A little McDonald's gift card. We're going to give that no strings attached. There it is, no strings. You can have a gift card. It's not very much, but enough to get a coffee or something. But here's a challenge that I would maybe have for you. I wonder if you could use that McDonald's gift card if there's someone in your life who really is able to speak into your life, or you'd like them to be able to speak into your life because you think a lot of them and you want to develop that kind of relationship. Use that card for that purpose. Take them out for a coffee. Invite them out for a milkshake. No more Shamrock shakes, unfortunately, but there might be something else there that's good. Maybe a parfait in the morning. Use that card for that purpose. I'd encourage you to do that. Now, I know this Father's Day and we have a card for the men, and so, women, I know you might feel left out. So I've made a little provision. Right? So all the men get a card, no strings attached. Ladies, if you're here and you say, you know what, I also need someone that speaks in my life. I do have someone who speaks in my life, and I'd like to meet up with them. These same gentlemen, they're going to be at the doors this morning, and if you have someone in mind that you could share a coffee with or share a tea with or something, then you feel free to pick up one of those cards as well. And hopefully there's enough to cover that. Any that are left over, we'll put them into our visitor bags. So again, no strings attached for the men. You're all going to get a card when we sing our last hymn. Ladies, there is a string attached. If you have someone in mind that you'd like to take out for a coffee, I'd encourage you to take one of these cards and do that. Who can speak authoritatively, encouragingly, challengingly into your life to be God's instrument, His voice, His encouragement, His challenge into your life?